back, weary friends. Today, on Absurd Unveil, I shall weave for you a tale of cosmic unsettling as a man and his wife welcome a brother who, like so many of us, is lost and develops a strange obsession for the stars. Adam and Sarah watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning an eerie orange-pink. The warmth of the summer air was waning, and the crickets had taken up their nightly chorus. They sat in silence on the porch of their farmhouse, the evening breeze carrying with it the smell of hay from the meadow behind them. Suddenly, as if on cue, a voice called out from the peak of the hill. It was Jack, Adam's younger brother. He was to stay with them for a time. His wife had left him with their 2 children and gone upstate to be with family. She was pursuing divorce. Adam and Sarah watched as Jack made his way down the hill, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. When he reached the foot of the hill, he stopped and looked up at the old farmhouse. The sight of it seemed to fill him with a feeling of nostalgia. Without a word, he trudged up the path, his footsteps heavy, his eyes searching the windows of the house as if he were looking for something. He walked as a man in ruin. When he reached the door, he gave Adam and Sarah a slight nod and stepped inside. For the next few days, Jack seemed to wander aimlessly in a world of his own. During the day, he would take long walks around the property. In the evening, he would sit on the porch for hours, watching as the sun set behind the hills. At times, he seemed lost in thought, or lost in memories of a happier past. Other times, he just seemed to be going through the motions, one foot in front of another, without any clear destination or purpose. On those days, Adam and Sarah would watch him from afar, feeling a deep sadness for Jack's circumstances. Over breakfast one morning, Jack talked about his marriage and the time he'd spent with his wife. His voice was sad and distant, like a man trying to make sense of something that had already slipped away. As Adam listened to him speak, it was clear that Jack was now in a place of despair. Gone were the days when he would speak passionately about life and love. Now his words seemed empty. One day, as they were walking together, Adam asked Jack what he was looking for. At first, Jack didn't answer, but after a few moments he spoke. "I'm looking for a sign," he said, "something that will tell me what to do." Adam nodded, understanding the sentiment. He wished he could offer Jack some kind of advice, but he knew it would not be taken. Later, after the sun went down, Adam gathered up some blankets, flashlights, and snacks, and then made his way up the hill with Jack. Together they lay in the grass and stared up at the night sky, watching as stars danced across like tiny fireflies. Adam kept talking to him about his favorite constellations, pointing out their shapes as if they were old friends. He hoped it would remind Jack that life was still full of meaning and possibilities. The next morning, when Adam awoke, he found Jack outside on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon. The passing weeks, Jack began helping out around the farm, taking care of the animals and tending to the garden with a newfound enthusiasm. He also started spending more time with Adam and Sarah, talking about life and sharing stories from his past. Jack seemed determined to take control of his life again, and it was a relief for both Adam and Sarah to see this positive change in him. It was clear he was still hurting from his divorce, but at least now he was making progress towards healing his broken heart. On a warm afternoon, Adam and Sarah came home to Jack, yelling into the phone, yelling at his wife, yelling to put the kids on the phone, and yelling, "Why wouldn't she put the kids on the phone?" Adam and Sarah remained outside so as not to disturb. A few days later, Jack announced that he was going to sleep out as long as he could. Adam and Sarah watched from the porch as Jack settled himself in beneath the stars. They could see him from time to time, a solitary figure lying there in the darkness, his eyes open wide as if he were searching the heavens. The nights passed, and Jack continued to sleep out in the meadow. The stars seemed to be his only companions, and Adam couldn't help but worry about him. One night, as Adam and Sarah watched from the porch, they saw a shooting star streak across the sky. Jack sat up quickly, his eyes following the trail of the star as it disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Jack seemed different. He was more focused, more determined. He spent the day working on something in the barn and refused to tell Adam and Sarah what it was. That night, after dinner, Jack announced that he had something to show them. He led them out to the barn, and there, in the center of the room, was a telescope. "I built it myself," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "I've been studying the stars for weeks, and I think I've found something." He pointed the telescope up at the sky, adjusting the focus until a single star came into view. "Look at that," he said. Its light was flickering erratically, as if it were sending out some kind of signal. Jack's eyes were wide with excitement as he adjusted the telescope, trying to get a better look. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with wonder. "I'm not sure," Jack said, "but I think it might be a message from somewhere out there." Adam watched as Jack continued to study the star, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for his brother, perhaps pity. He wished he could take away his pain, which surely drove him to obsessions as these, but he knew that he was powerless in this situation. All he could do was stand by his side and offer him whatever support he needed. For the next few weeks, Jack spent every night in the barn, studying and trying to decipher the message. And then, one night, it happened. Jack burst into the farmhouse, his eyes wild with excitement. "I've done it," he exclaimed. "I've decoded the message." Adam and Sarah didn't believe him. He told them the message there in the kitchen, the whole of what he'd decoded. By the end, he was openly weeping. He spoke of a powerful force that emanated from beyond, its message echoing across the vastness of the universe. It was like a whisper from some distant star, a reminder of all that is timeless and true. To hear these words was to be overcome with their gravity, their power enough to inspire even the most hardened of hearts and minds. Soon grisly images filled his words. Nightmarish creatures in dead space, screams in the night, from the cosmos, battles fought between gods and universes that had been extinguished, and that none of it means anything. "Life has no meaning," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's all an empty void." Adam was stunned. He stepped in to comfort his brother and hugged him tightly, and the three of them stood there in the kitchen for a long time, silent except for the sound of Jack's sobs. Jack began sleeping in the barn with the telescope. He would come out now and then to say he was listening to all the stars were telling him. They were telling him so much, he told Adam and Sarah, just so much. Adam and Sarah grew worried. This obsession with the stars had taken over Jack's life. They tried to reason with him, but he refused to listen. He spent all his time in the barn, communicating with the stars, and neglecting his own life and responsibilities. He stayed awake for days at a time, his face pale and his eyes sunken. He spoke in strange tongues, and when spoken to directly, he often didn't seem to understand what was said. On some nights they would hear him out in the barn singing strange songs. He'd sometimes have moments of intense clarity where he seemed himself and perfectly mannered, but these grew less, and then, after a time, ceased entirely. The sheriff was called one night when Jack had been screaming on the front lawn such strange words, screaming them at the stars. It disturbed Sarah, watching him scream with such violence and such strange language. He was calmed and put in the sheriff's car. Adam and the sheriff then examined the barn, searching for something that might explain what had caused Jack's mania. In the corner, they found something strange. It was an altar made from some of Adam's dead animals, arranged in a pattern around the telescope. On top of the altar were offerings, things like feathers and bones, and what looked like some of Sarah's hair. The sheriff looked mystified as he surveyed this scene, uncertain as to what he should do next. He thought it best Jack spend the night down at the station, but Jack was back the next morning. That night, Adam and Sarah went to the barn to talk to Jack, but they found it empty. The telescope was gone, and so was Jack. They searched the property, calling out his name, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Adam and Sarah gave up hope of ever finding Jack. Adam and Sarah stayed away from the barn. It always smelled of dead animals. And then, one night, they heard a noise outside. It was Jack, standing in the doorway to the barn. He looked tired and haggard, his clothes dirty and disheveled. He said nothing as he shuffled past them into the house. When they asked where he'd been, he said, "Has my wife called? Have the kids?" Jack disappeared again the next morning, and Adam and Sarah never saw him again. For many years they were left with a feeling of dread and confusion. The sky had become an ever-present reminder of something mysterious and sinister that had been lost and forgotten.